I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to the Board of Education about the superintendent's proposed budget. At this time, I'm able to propose a particular budget. There'll still be plenty of opportunity for the board to discuss and have their own thoughts on this. So I'm going to bring you through about the next 30 minutes to walk you through this. So stay with me, try to stay engaged, and I'll do my best to keep you engaged. We're hoping that what I can do tonight is outline some of the successes that the school, the education department has had with our kids, therefore, how we use the money and the successes we've had. But I also want to outline the challenges that we face. I want to talk about some of the funding gap that has been created here in town. And certainly I also want to highlight the fact that the state budget crisis that occurred last year, where we ended up having to lose a number of staff, you'll see in this year's particular budget presentation myself trying to bring some of that staff back, because we lost a number of people that we didn't want to lose, and we have some proposals to bring that back. So it does take a team in order to make this, put this budget together. The principals are here tonight. They spent a lot of time, so did folks like Ms. Parsons and Ms. Trinks and Mr. Hendrickson, to put the budget that's going to be in front of you tonight. But also the Board of Education members in terms of the goals and your impact as we move forward through this. I'm going to go through a couple of these slides pretty quickly, but just keep in mind our mission: to challenge, inspire, and prepare all students for success in the ever-changing and complex world. The goals, I don't want to spend a lot of time on because we've spent time talking at the beginning of the years when these were passed by the Board of Education, but I think it's important to note them and to have them part of the presentation because they are in large part how the budget is developed. Speaking of that, this slide about the whole child, sometimes people don't always realize that we do more than just educate, and just do the academics. We really are about the social, emotional, cognitive, character, physical, and academic pieces of what makes a child. And we work in concert with our families to help develop the entire child. We focus a lot on academics. That's one of our main priorities. But there's a lot of other things that go on into a school system when we educate a child. I want to start with some of the recent accomplishments, and this won't be exhaustive, but it will highlight some of the things that you've already seen along the way. To start, we have our Smarter Balance scores, and I'm sharing with you over time the increase that we've seen from 14-15 to 17-18 in both math and English language arts. And those scores represent the 3 through 8 scores in terms of our SBAC scores. So there's been some definite movement in terms of our Smarter Balance scores over time. Another recent accomplishment is what I call the meteoric rise in advanced placement participation, where one of the goals of the school system is to try to make sure we're challenging all of our students and giving them as many opportunities as possible. So when you look at this slide, back in 14-15, 9% of all the students in the building were taking an AP class. Fast forward a few years to this particular school year, and you've got about a third of the entire school building taking AP courses. And that is a range of courses, from the newest one this year, AP Government and Politics, to ones that have been around for a long time, like AP Calculus. So now there's 9 courses that we're offering, and our work with the high school this year is to offer AP Computer Science going into next year. So there'll be a 10th AP course offered. So therefore, kids who are thinking about that, that computer software piece will also have an opportunity to take that class. Another recent accomplishment is our 4-year cohort graduation. Give a lot of credit to Mr. Holtz and his team here at the high school. For many, many years, the graduation rate has been in this mid-80s to sometimes it goes into the upper 80s. But for the class of 2018, the 92.3% graduation rate is something to be very excited about. With small class sizes, every child counts quite a bit in a percentage. But to see it go into the 92% range shows that we're making some really good strides in keeping all of our students engaged in education, therefore giving them greater opportunities when they leave. And I want to note, with graduation rates, there are always kids that need to stay a 5th and 6th year, and it could be for special education reasons. They actually count against us in this number, but that's just life. We're willing to take that coming against us because we know those children need the additional years here, and it's right to do that. I think another piece that's really important for the board to understand, for our staff to understand, and especially our parents of kids maybe who aren't at the high school, is that our students get accepted to a wide range of colleges. And I asked the guidance department to put together the last 4 classes where they've been accepted. This is where they've been accepted, not necessarily where they chose to go, but they could have gone if they wanted to. And families will make decisions about where they choose to go for many different reasons, and that's not our call. But the next slide's hard to see here online, but I wanted to point out a few. You've got places like on this slide, Arizona State, Boston College, Boston University, Bryant, Cornell, Emerson, Fairfield, Hofstra. On the next page, you've got schools like Northeastern, Penn State, Purdue, Quinnipiac, Rensselaer Polytechnic, Sacred Heart, Smith, the Citadel, University of Arizona, University of Oklahoma. And on to the last slide here, you have Trinity, Tufts, UConn, UPenn, UMass, Wentworth Institute of Technology, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I think it's important for people to recognize that if you go to Terryville High School, the number of schools that are available to you upon graduation are many. And I was impressed to see this myself. And I think there may be a perception by parents that that's not the case. And so I wanted to include this, hoping that people would recognize, yeah, our kids are quality, and they're well prepared and can get into some very excellent schools. For financial reasons, sometimes people make the Tunxis decision and then transfer to UConn or Central. That's a very smart economic decision, and that's okay, and I'm fully comfortable with that. But we do want kids to be able to get into schools that they want to get into and pursue their passions. Continuing the recent accomplishments, SAT obviously leads into where kids can get into schools. Yes, in some schools they've gone away from SAT scores, but it's still a very predominant way of getting in. So our SAT math scores have made some significant increases since 2016. And in the chart below, you see how our juniors, all different kids, class 2016 juniors, 2017, all different kids, but the scores on the PSAT are going up. They're going all in the right direction. So more and more kids are scoring higher on the English and the math sections, and those percentages are the percentage of kids who are meeting the benchmark as set by the state. So that's another piece of very nice recent accomplishment. And then some, on this final slide of accomplishments, we've been really focused on safety, and Mr. Vigliotti and SRO Brody went out to every building, worked with every principal, identified all the safety needs at each school. Then we came back and we developed a capital improvement plan that we submitted to Capital Improvement Commission, trying to identify those things like cameras and bollards and entrances to schools. So that's been a big part of our work. We also, Mr. Hendrickson, working with Mr. Mazon, put together a grant request through the state. They offered a grant for safety, so that we'll hear back in March. So that's been a major focus. Obviously, you guys all know about social emotional learning work that we've done in the district. That's going very well. Making sure our kids have access to technology. Mr. Trudeau and his group really make sure that Wi-Fi is up and running and that our kids have access to the Chromebooks. They work well. EduClimber, which just started this year, we have Mr. Fedorkevich, who's one of the tech folks who's been leading that work with Ms. Parsons. And our teachers, our school data teams, our district data teams have really been using data more precisely this year to help our students. Our curriculum is being captured better through now an electronic platform, and Reader's Workshop has made it all the way up to grade 7 with plans to move it to grade 8 next year. So those are all the recent accomplishments that I wanted to highlight so far. But I also thought it's important, sorry about that, important to talk about our efficiencies. because one thing that the Plymouth Board of Education has been is efficient with its money. And I'm going to share some other information with you later to show you that you've been very efficient. And in some cases, we're falling far behind some of our peers in terms of what I call the funding gap. And I want to talk about that a little bit more later. But in terms of efficiencies, we made a huge move last year to get out of self-insurance and to get into the state plan 2.0. And it's paying off in very significant financial dividends for us. And the insurance is still a high-quality insurance for our staff. Probably, it might even be considered the best insurance in the state. That's my own opinion. It may not be everybody's opinion, but it's an excellent insurance. We've also reduced the number of outplaced students. So we've brought a high number of students back into district. I think the current number, we've gone from 18 down to 11, 18 down to 12, because we just had a recent change there. And I want to make sure people, I think the board knows, but when you bring a student back from an outplacement, you don't just save all that money. There are things we need to do in the district to allow that to happen. And I'm going to share some of those things because they're going to be ongoing costs moving forward. We've also reduced a bus run. You always hear parents and people say those buses are empty, they're empty. The bus company does look every year, and they felt the ability to reduce from 15 to 14, and we've done that, saving money there. And we've also hired some staff internally to save money. Those are things like hiring a board-certified behavior analyst, the teacher for the hearing impaired, which allowed us to bring some students back, and actually allowed us to avoid sending some students out. And our food service program that we brought back in-house a couple of years ago continues to operate in the black, where it was operating in the negative when it was done by an outside agency. So there's been those efficiencies. I already mentioned that we're applying for a state security grant. I will say we do sit down and pay attention to every position before we post it when we have an opening to see if it's still the appropriate position or if we need to change it in some way. The town actually pays us funds for some of our technology services, so we actually service the town, including a number of places in the town hall, police department. Mr. Trudeau, again, there is valuable in making sure those services are offered. So we have a nice collaboration with them. And it's also important to note we're going to do a facility study this year. It's been held off because of budget cuts. The Finance and Operations Committee just looked at a RFP that will go out. The plan there is to see what our demographics are going to look like over the next 10 years and how to best use our facilities. But I want to caution you, that will not impact 1920. We will not have anything coming forward that says, for 1920, this is what we're going to do. So there'll be work as we end this school year and start next year to make some decisions, or at least have good information for the board to operate from when it comes to demographics and when it comes to our facilities. All right, these slides you've seen if you've been on the board or if you've been paying attention to our presentations. I know Mr. Kilduff from the Board of Finance is also present tonight, and we appreciate him being present. He's seen this slide in terms of how we compare to the spending per pupil that other towns compare. So this is called the net current expenditure per pupil. And this is what the state uses to do an apple-to-apple comparison from one district to another. So all of the costs for all of the same categories can be calculated using the new EFS. It used to be called the ED001. And they're allowed to aggregate all the costs, divide by the number of enrollment, and that's how they come up with a per pupil. This is the most legitimate way to actually compare. So these schools are all in our DERG, which means they're similar to us in economics. If you see in the purple in the upper right, this is the 16-17 data. This is what I showed last year. And there was a $2,500 difference between us and the state median. And I told you last year, if we had the state median, we'd have $3.5 million more in our budget. That was last year. This is this year's slide. The state median actually went up $1,000 in the 17-18 data. We had to double check this, but our net cost actually is exactly equivalent when you round to the dollar from the 16-17 to the 17-18. That's why it's it's still 14,526. We've moved down, therefore becoming even spending less per pupil in terms of being relative to the DIRG. You see that only Enfield and Wolcott spend less than us in our DIRG. You can look at those one on top of the other, and it's pretty visual. You can see how the red line is moving further left, and our blue line is moving further right. Our distance from that is now $3,500 per child from the state median. So that's now a $5 million gap between what we currently receive and what we would receive if we received the median. And remember from your math classes, median means that 50% of the folks are above it and 50% are below it. So we're just talking about if we were to be in the exact middle, it'd be $5 million more to our budget. So I think those are important for people to pay attention to. From the fact that we're very efficient, we don't spend very much money on our education, but this is also starting to become a little alarming because we're not providing as many opportunities to our students that other districts are able to. I also think it's important to look at inflation, also called consumer price index. And this graph here just shows how we're not even meeting inflation over the past 8-9 years. And cumulatively, we're 6 points behind where inflation is at this point. So we're unable to afford what we used to be able to afford because inflation, we have not kept up even with inflation. So again, another important piece to be aware. You may guess what this means, but I want you to think about it for a second. 153 out of 166. Pause for just a moment. If you lined up every single district, all 166, and you put the first one in the front of the line, and you put the 166 at the end of the line, Plymouth would fall in at 153. So we're in the bottom 10% in terms of funding per pupil. So again, it's another just comparison. Especially, I want to share this data because sometimes people complain to the board that you're spending too much, that your spending is out of control. There are people I've heard say these things. But this is the types of data that says, no, it's not true. In fact, we're one of the most efficient districts in the state of Connecticut. But it also, on the flip side, means that we're really not offering as many opportunities to our students. There are two sides to that coin. So some of the challenges we're facing, and then I'll get into some of the meat and potatoes. We are well below the state median funding. We have a new governor who was just sworn in today, and we're not sure where education cost sharing is going to go or excess cost reimbursement. I'm going to show you where our free and reduced lunch population now lives, which means you're going to see a rise in our student need, which typically needs additional support. And special education costs are definitely difficult to predict. Here's how we do it. We take who we have now in the district. We say, if they were to be with us next year with a 3%, say, price inflation, because that's what we typically see, about a 3% price inflation for outplacements, that's what we put into our budget. We don't put in fake extra students. We don't predict that there'll be 2 more, 3 more, 4 more. We put in what we know. And that's what makes things very challenging to predict. Because I don't know if tomorrow someone's going to move into the district that it requires high needs or moves out. And that's why we always have to be very careful and cautious about our spending as we go through the year, because things can change literally overnight. So those are some of the challenges we're facing. Continuing with some of the challenges, I think it's important to note that Plymouth went from 31.1% free and reduced lunch to essentially 41% free and reduced lunch. So the needs of the students coming to us are greater. It's just important to be aware of that. And that's a significant increase. So in terms of our priorities, our budget priorities moving forward, we do want to balance our student needs and the additional costs of the town. I think we've shown we're a very good partner with the town, and we need to be aware of that. We want to continue to look at safety, but we have to look at increasing student achievement. We have to make sure we continue to march to our mission. We want to continue to develop classroom libraries and instructional materials K-12, continue to develop and capture and refine our new standards, the curriculum. And we want to keep our one-to-one device ratio going for our kids 6 to 12. And we've done very well along those, that device piece. We're actually adding more opportunities for our elementary kids when we have them. So what's some of the notable items that we want to add? This list is very small. This is just the equipment items. Our teachers need to be more mobile, and so instead of the desktop type machines that they have, they're very old now, and Rich is always telling me how much we need to replace them. We're moving more towards laptops because teachers are going to data team meetings. They need the computers with them. And if you've ever watched an elementary teacher work, if they have a desktop, they have to run over and scurry to the desktop from their reading section, and it just breaks the flow. So having the laptop being more literally flexible to get them to different spaces will help them. Readers and Writers Workshop to the 8th grade will cost a little bit of money. We need to make sure our Wi-Fi continues to work at a high rate, and that does mean some maintenance there. And then you'll see later what we would like to do at Plymouth Center in terms of grade 2, and that will also require that we add some additional classroom resources for a third library there for a third second grade class. The staff is really some of the notable changes that I want to make sure I point out to you guys. First thing to pay attention to is the music piece. And this may get some more conversation, which is perfectly fine. But next year, 1920, you're going to see the middle school student population be the largest it's going to be for the foreseeable future. You have the largest class in the district in 7th grade right now, and you have the second largest, or at least equal to the second largest, in 5th grade. So the middle school will have the two largest classes in the district. That's posing some challenges this year, even with scheduling. And so our plan is to, if only for 1 year, if it doesn't make a longer term process, moving part of the high school music staff from the high school to the middle school to help allow for class sizes in the core classes to be smaller. Because the middle school is struggling with places that kids can go for music or other electives in order to reduce the class sizes in the core classes. So that's a way of solving that problem, at least in the short run, without adding additional money. Someone could say just add additional staff, but that would be adding additional costs. So that is our current thought process. The choir and the band at the high school are your two major classes, and those, of course, would stay intact, and there would be a third class that the teacher would teach here. The other two classes are traditionally much, much, much smaller. So there would be very few students who would lose services by this teacher going to the middle school to help out. We're also looking to see if there's any opportunity to have the elementary music teacher provide some support at the middle school. The other thing that's important to note is that our French at the high school continues to dwindle in enrollment, and we believe it's time to teach it out. What that means really is make sure that the current French students get their 3 years of French, but then not continue to offer it. So we wouldn't offer a French 1 next year, so therefore we'd only need 2 sections of French, thus allowing us to cut back on benefits and on some salary. So there's some savings there. That's why it's in parentheses. You'll hear more about this at the workshop, But we really have been seeing some significant needs at Fischer Elementary School, not just in, at recess or in the cafeteria, but those are two areas where we've had some issues popping up, but just everyday issues where we believe a dean of students is absolutely appropriate. And Fischer Elementary School being our Title I school, there are funds specifically allocated for additional staff at the Title I school. So we would advocate for having a dean of students, which would be a teacher position. It would be 180. It would be the same days as a teacher position, same as what we have at the middle school. We feel like that would be a very appropriate response. That's a prediction of the cost, including benefits for that position. The next position down is a literacy specialist, 612. Keep in mind, when we had to cut staff because of the $1 million we gave back to the town, we cut a literacy specialist at the high school. We cut a literacy specialist at the middle school. Our plan this year is to bring one person back to oversee all of the literacy programming 612, which means making sure the interventionists are doing exactly what they need to do, making sure that all the programming for our kids who need tiered support are getting it. And we're predicting with benefits that would cost around $90. Again, those are predictions. I can't see the future. We've already hired a teacher of the hearing impaired this year, and so we need to carry that forward. Otherwise, students who have come back from outplacements or would have needed them will need to go in those directions, which would cost us likely more money. So keeping the teacher of the hearing impaired is critical. The grade 3 tutor at PCS, I'm going to show you enrollment numbers in a minute for the two elementary schools, but we believe the tutor that we currently have now servicing 3 sections, 2 grade 1s and a grade 2, would stay on full time to work with the larger grade 3 class next year. So, and again, you'll see that in a minute. And we have a high number of special education students at Fischer Elementary School, where we've brought on a tutor to support the special education teachers this year. And it's believed at this time that we need to keep that tutor on because the numbers are not going to change for the better. So we're that tutor, keeping them on and moving them forward. So those are some of the notable staffing changes. You'll see when we get to the primary budget drivers that certified staff salary and non-certified staff salary is driving a lot of the budget increase. And you see a lot of the reasons up in front of you right there. So projected class sizes, we're projecting Fischer to look like this. The left side of the slide is current enrollment. The right side is projected. It's hard to project kindergarten enrollment at this time. So we typically just use the number that is in there for this year. Excuse me. So that could change. So we see a need for the 3 sections in each grade level at Fischer moving forward. And you see the class sizes would be in that 16 to 18 range, which is actually very, very suitable for learning for our students. Those are very nice class sizes for kids. Plymouth Center poses a different challenge. The challenge there is that the class sizes have it's a little bit more jagged. You see at Fischer, there's a very consistent enrollment. Here at Plymouth Center, we're seeing a little bit more jagged enrollment. So our proposal is for, again, the left-hand side is current and the right-hand side is future. If you look at the current 5th grade class, there's 50 kids, 3 sections, but the 4th grade class is only 45 students. So what we're going to recommend is that we only have 2 5th grade classes next year. We take that extra section, and instead of cutting it, we move it into grade 2, which would mean the current grade 1 classes that are large now would be brought down to a much more manageable 17. The challenge for us is what to do with the grade 2 class, which has had some conversation at the board. And our belief at this time is to keep on that tutor, like I mentioned before, but only service that particular classroom. So it's 27 students we'd have a full-time teacher and a full-time tutor. And again, that could get some conversation during the workshop. We could talk about other ways of managing that. In the end, the board gets to, certainly have some say on that. We're trying to not necessarily add the extra teacher and have class sizes at 14 and 13, because that, of course, comes with a much bigger price tag. So we're trying to weigh what we think our students need with the additional costs. And we think that 27 with a tutor would be appropriate. And keep in mind, it's only January. I have no idea what's going to happen over the summer, because this 27 only popped itself up over the summer. So it could go to 32, and it could also come down to 22. So it's important to go slow and not, I think, make rash decisions that end up not being needed in the end. But that's what our proposal is at this point. So moving forward, and I know I spent a little bit of time on those, in terms of expenditures, you see that the schools themselves were not changing staff dramatically at the schools. Eli Terry and Terryville High School would get that extra literacy teacher built into those bar graphs. You see 3 years now of bar graphs there. Special education is a little bit misleading, because some of the savings they have are in that transportation area. They've made $70,000 worth of savings for next year's budget, but that doesn't come off of that middle special ed line. The cost in that special ed line would likely be bigger if we didn't hire folks like the teacher for the hearing impaired or bring students back out from outplacements. So even though it's a little bit bigger of an increase, it only amounts to about a 3% increase. And in special education world, that's not a huge increase. The next slide is all about the drivers. And I told you that the salaries are a major driver, and this is not from contract negotiations, although we have been trying to make sure the teachers have gotten a few more steps, because over the years, they've gotten way behind. And we're not all that attractive of a district for people to come and teach in, because our salaries are behind many other districts surrounding us. So we've been working with the board to provide steps. And over the last 6 years, teachers, well, including this 3-year contract, there'll be 4-step increases over the 6 years. But the bulk of that 454 is really about staff that we're trying to add back, given that we lost a number of staff, and these are the staff that we believe we need. The non-certified salaries, same thing. There's paras that we've had to hire when we brought students back from outplacements, so you see an increase there. But that healthcare, I remember when I first did these presentations, that healthcare number used to be in the $300,000 range, and it's $66,000 for next year. You see some major reductions in terms of special ed outplacements. That's the biggest reduction in our budget, $119,000. Special ed transportation reducing 70, diagnostic services reducing 53. So those are all reductions to the budget, the major reductions drivers. From historical increase, or in fact in 1819 decrease, you see that 6, 7, 7, 8, and 8, 9 were good years. You were having increases of 2.6 and 3.5%. It came down quite a bit over the last number of years. It's been a little jagged. And in 1819, we dropped by 0.72%. I think we only asked for 0.12%, and we still got a decrease. Part of that was we had made some very wise choices around health insurance, and so we were able to decrease some of our costs there. But we also worked very well with the town. If you include the $1 million we gave back to the town, which now allowed them to have a fund balance that's much healthier, which helps with their bond ratings and all those good things, which helps us borrow money as a town. But if you count that, we're more like a 4 or 5% decrease from that year. That didn't come off our bottom line, but it was money we didn't spend that year to try to make sure that the town was essentially not bankrupt. because that's never good for a Board of Education either, for a town to go bankrupt. I'm not sure if that's officially possible for a town to go bankrupt, but when you've got no money in your fund balance and you're borrowing to pay operating bills, that's not a good position to be in. So I think through Mr. Kilduff's leadership and communication process, he's helped work to try to make the Board of Finance, or the finance, in a much better position. And I also learned that all of the audits now for town and Board of Ed side are completely caught up as of December 31st. So that's also very good news to hear for bond ratings and just the confidence we can have in our funding. So what is the overall budget change? All that turns out to be $478,000 increase, $478,874, or a 1.992% increase. Given where we've been over the last few years, we're really hoping that we're going to land somewhere in this range. I know the town's going to want to pay attention to mill rate, and they should, but we need to add some of the staff back that we lost, and a less than 2% increase is certainly not anything to choke on, especially given what we've been able to accomplish over the last few years to help the town end up being where they are now, in a much better position. What are some of the near and long-term financial risks? These are the ones I think. How will our newly elected state officials manage the debt crisis in the state? How will the decisions they make around the budget impact the funding for the town of Plymouth? I don't know what they're going to do. You don't know what they're going to do. They probably don't know what they're going to do yet. Let's hope that they're not deciding in November when we're in the middle of a budget year. Will the newly elected state officials add additional burdens to towns? I keep telling Henry Martin and Whit Betts, I don't care if you reduce unfunded mandates. Just stop adding them. Stop adding them, and I'll be happier. But they have yet to find a way to do that. And so that'll be I'll continue to tell them, please, please, I know you feel like you need to do something, but adding what they think is helpful to us ends up costing us in staffing that we need to add or burdens that we have to take care of. So I want them to be really thoughtful about what they do during this long legislative session. And to what extent will our student demographics change, and how will that impact the needs of our instructional programming? As our students get needier, that usually means additional support. If we're going to make sure that our kids who need to be challenged and our kids who are struggling and everybody in between gets what they need, you need to provide tiered support to do that. So in summary, I think it's clear, I think I've made a strong point that there is a significant funding gap that exists here between Plymouth and a lot of towns in this state. We've still managed to make gains in academic, social, emotional learning and opportunities for our students, but we are in the bottom 10% of funding. And I will tell you, without additional support, I think that the education system will start to lose ground. There's only so much that we can ask our teachers to try to do with students without adding the needed supports. I think we've been a great partner with the town. I think we've been nothing but transparent and communicative with the town, and I think it's helped lead to a improved financial health of the town. And so I think it's time that the town now see that there's an obligation to put us in a position where we get what we need moving forward into 1920. So that's the summary there. Timeline, next Wednesday, starting at 6 o'clock in the library, we'll have a budget workshop open to the public. It's a special meeting of the board, so it's a board meeting. We'll have a public comment opportunity, but it's a board meeting to discuss line by line. You'll have every line item for the board, plus this presentation. We can ask lots of questions. We have a second meeting on January 23rd, if necessary. Last year it was not needed, but if it's needed, we use it this year. And on the 13th, we come back here, this very same spot, and you have to adopt a budget. However long it takes, whatever you decide to do, because 2 days later, I need to get a budget to Town Hall, and that's part of the town charter. In March, we present to the Board of Finance. I predict March 21st, and then there'll be a meeting generally in the April timeframe, to have a public meeting and make some final decisions about the town budget, which includes the board budget. So with all that, hope I didn't go too long. I might have went a little longer than I wanted, but to make a point, I need to make sure I went through those. So if there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we certainly have the workshop. So are there any questions that I can attempt to answer now? And before I open that, if you have questions between now and the workshop, I would please email me, and I will collect your questions, because it's a lot easier for us to collect data, during the week than in the moment. So I'd appreciate that. But if there's any questions now that you have, Cindy?
With the increase in the middle school, I don't see, outside of the music, you increasing staff. Why wouldn't we need to increase a little bit more staff at the middle school?
The overall total population increase ends up being about 9 to 12 students. So we've been working, Ms. Parsons has been working with Ms. Suffrage and Ms. Serrera, and they've been looking at how they can use the smaller class sizes in, say, grade 7 in order to have a grade 7 teacher maybe teach 4 sections of grade 7 and still have appropriate class sizes, and teach a grade 8 class, thus reducing the class sizes. So we're working with them to see how we can use our resources at the middle school in order to do that. But the thing that kept getting in our way was that elective that we needed kids to go out to. And they didn't have a place to go, and therefore they were going to pool up in very large class sizes, which is why we looked to adding these music opportunities for students in the schedule. So we don't think we need additional staff for next year beyond what I pointed out.
Or adding an elective, because what are the electives that they have now?
What are the exact electives? Jen, you want to just, I know you probably have them off the...
Sure, so they have music, they have art. It's not necessarily elective, but we call them like the unified arts. They have art, they have music, they have innovative technologies, they have Latin American studies in 7th grade, and also PE and wellness.
Wouldn't PE and wellness be a part of the core, though?
When we say core, we talk about the core academic areas, so reading, writing, math, science, social studies.
Right. Electives at the middle school are slightly misnamed compared to the high school, because they have to take all of them. The elective ends up being like do I take choir or band, or do I take general music? And by offering a couple extra sections of music, we're able to provide what we need in terms of flexibility at the middle school.
And without adding it, we would not have enough staff to teach general music, so students would have to take chorus or band. And there are students who prefer to learn more music theory instead of the performing, and so by adding the music teacher, we'll be able to offer the general music, which is part of our curriculum. We just, with 3 grade levels and the numbers next year, would be asking one teacher to teach 9 different courses.
Well, just with the extra rooms in the middle school, there's no more cooking, sewing, woodwork. So I just think that if you're only allowing music to extend, not every child, I think there's other courses that could be interesting, especially since that school is going to have the most amount of kids in it. I would think adding something more diverse rather than just, we need to put a few extra kids over here so class is smaller.
Remember, this is a 1-year issue. Then the 8th grade moves up to the high school. So we have to think long-term as well. So we want to solve the solution. We want to solve the problem. If we're going to add a teacher back and add something like tech ed or add back family consumer science, that's a conversation we can have. But that obviously is going to be a programmatic decision too. There's going to be curriculum costs that have to be added back in. All those other factors would have to play a part. And we had changed the tech ed course to the instructional technology class because quite frankly, it's very difficult to find tech ed teachers, and innovative technology is much more connecting kids to our STEM work and getting them into the technology and critical thinking along those ways. The high school tech ed teacher is doing excellent work around getting kids to use their minds and their hands to get into problem solving. At the middle school, the STEM classes has been evolving but ever improving course.
And then you said that a manageable class is 17, but at Plymouth Center, you still want to keep the second grade at one class level at 27, and by putting the tutor full-time. But you also said that we have the lowest per pupil expendage, so why aren't we trying to spend more money on more teachers at the most important ages of their lives, first, second, third, to teach them their basic reading, writing, and math, versus just paying a tutor? Why don't we want to extend to make sure that our younger children can go on and take the AP classes that you're offering in high school, versus they can't take the AP classes because they didn't learn their basics in elementary?
I would say that you're making kind of a large leap there to say if they're in a class of 27, they can't take AP classes when they're in high school, but I get your point that, listen, when we get into the discussions, if the board wants to move into adding a second, third grade class and have class sizes of 13 and 14, we can talk about that. But I'm also grappling with the realities of what I've been facing with budget increases and what we actually get. So we want to talk about priorities at that point. You know, what's more important? We'd have to have those conversations. And at this time, we're saying that a tutor with the 27 students and a certified teacher is a workable solution there. Is it the best? Maybe not. But I don't have the $5 million that I would have if I had the median cost. If I had the $5 million, none of this would be a question. I'd be trying to figure out how to spend all that $5 million at this point. So we had to make some decisions around where we would put the money. And so, and again, the 27 could change to 24 by the time we're done with the school year. There's actually been a few ins and outs in even grade 1 and grade 2 this year at Plymouth Center. Some have left us, and some have come, and we've had some new students join us. So you don't know exactly what will happen, but it's open for conversation. We get to the workshop, so we'd be happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, even the fifth grade, it's going to be, 24, 25 kids, so.
22 and a half, I think. Well,
45 students.
22 and 23. Yeah, you see on the side there, it does the math out. It's 22.5, which means 22 in one section, 23 in others. And in fifth grade, that's a very manageable class. It's a very manageable class.
The concern, it's not really a question, Marty, it's just the concern and the perception that's coming out of this budget. And, I've been advocating for that second grade teacher at Plymouth Center because I feel that's too big of a class size for the learning perspective of those children that are in that class. I think it's an unmanageable situation for that teacher. That's me personally. And that's talking from a business sense. The concern that I have with this budget is that now you're asking for a dean of students at Fischer Elementary School, which we've never ever had in the past. Our elementary schools have been run by principals and staff, and evidently they've been running relatively well. Now your concern is you need the dean of students there. It's going to cost you approximately $80,000. I think you're going to get a little bit of pushback from some individuals in town when it comes to looking at class sizes at Plymouth Center, all right, and bringing in a dean of students at Fischer Elementary. And the only reason why I say that, and it was even when I decided to move to Plymouth and buy a house here, people asked me, why did I buy a house on the Terrible side of town when I could have bought a house on the Plymouth side of town? And the reasoning that I gave them was because of the affordability. But most of the parents that I spoke to said that, Jer, you have to understand that Plymouth Center School gives kids, in their opinion, a better education than what the kids get. And at the time, my kids were going to Prospect Street School and Main Street School. They were diversified. It was Prospect Street School was K through 2, and then East Main or Main Street School, whatever you want to call it, was 3 through 5. Personally, I really didn't care as long as my kids were getting taught. But it's just a perception from people in this town who feel that Plymouth Center is the better elementary school, and that's why they choose to go on that side of town. So I think, in all honesty, when people see this, they're going to be very concerned about the education that their kids are getting at Plymouth Center. So I'm just doing it from my own opinion, from how people perceive what's going on at Plymouth Center concerning Fischer Elementary.
In that particular class or something?
Well, not only that particular class, but also that school in particular. Okay, so I would probably safe to assume that if, with the dean of students, why you need them, I would probably have some information to individuals who are going to get up and ask, why do we need a dean of students at Fischer Elementary, that you explain to them the issues that are concerns for not only yourself, but also the principal that's there.
Actually, at the budget workshop, Ms. Loveland will be prepared to discuss that justification with you. Yep. Other questions?
I'm good, Dave.
Everybody good?
I'm good.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.